My name is Jordan Conyas. I work for TPA and so glad to have you all here this morning. I'd love to introduce Dr. Robin Miller. Before I do that, just a few housekeeping things. As I mentioned, would love to see as many faces as possible to engage and just be present. But if we could mute, that would be lovely. There will be a time at the end that Dr. Miller is using to have for question and answers that you all can unmute and ask your questions. We will save all the questions for the end of the webinar. But if you have them as they come up, you can type them in the chat and just know that we'll address those at the end. But for now, yeah, just again, really, really glad y'all are here. As you, I'm sure, know, this is Dr. Robin Miller. She is a clinical psychologist coming from Maryland, and she is the founder of TheraClosure. She created the first psychotherapist professional executor service. And we're really glad that she is here with us. And Dr. Miller, I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It's so great to be here with you all. I am excited to connect with you. I think some people were looking for how to mute, perhaps. If you couldn't figure that out, you just click on audio and it should give you the option to mute, and then you'll see a little red microphone. So I am going to just jump right in. The therapeutic bond matters, right? Most therapists will agree. If the powerful alliance, the way clients feel understood, supported, cared for, connected, has the healing benefits that we rely on to be an agent of therapeutic change, then we have to consider that it has the possibility to cause harm as well. So we train to put in place our frame, boundaries, abstain from dual relationships. We work to understand our countertransference. We ensure competencies, client autonomy. We know the drill. We try our best to practice within our ethics code. We know not to abandon clients. But what about when we face our own life-threatening emergencies? Even if we don't mean to abandon clients, if we die or are incapacitated, clients may feel just that. What do we owe our clients to protect them from harm? To ensure that we do only good, even when, or especially when, we can't control what might happen to interrupt good treatment and potentially cause harm. So I've been in private practice for 25 years. I am a therapist. That's what I love to do. But my story has evolved, and I'll share some of it with you as we go, so that over the past couple of years, I've written hundreds of professional wills for therapists. And we're going to talk about why this is important, what happens if you don't have one, what you really need to think about planning for, and who can you rely on for an actionable and comprehensive plan. So I do want to make a disclosure. As you know, I have created TheraClosure, and so I stand to benefit financially from any purchases. The presentation is about the ethics, lessons learned, guidelines that we all need to think about regardless of how you choose to fulfill them. And my solutions have been created from feedback from presentations like this. Okay, so let's talk about why this is important. Let's start by outlining some of the core assumptions of psychotherapy. I'm going to take 30 seconds for this. I don't want to take our time, but we all, I think, can get on board with saying that safety, support, empathy, compassion, attachment, confidentiality, trust, acceptance, that regardless of your therapeutic orientation, these words capture something essential about the way of working with our clients. And let me also say, I will use clients and patients interchangeably. So anyway, we are talking about relationships. That is fundamental. That is where we are beginning this conversation today. And really, what we're talking about is preventing traumatic terminations. So, I want you to take a minute and think about what if you were not able to return to your practice tomorrow without warning. What would happen? Who would show up? Who would be looking for you online, at your office door, sitting in your waiting room? What would they do? Would they call? Would they email? Would they text you? Who would see those messages? Who would respond? Would anyone respond? How would the client feel about not being responded to or getting a message from someone on your behalf? What would that look like for your practice? You may want to jot down what comes to mind. So the golden rule that helps us is, what if your own therapist suddenly disappeared? How would you feel? What would you need in their absence? And the overarching question is, what would help you to feel that you had been as compassionate and conscientious in your absence, in planning for an absence, as you try to be every day as their therapist? So I know you care deeply about your clients. You've worked really hard to establish your practice and your skill. And the idea is this is in line with that. This is not just a risk management thing you need to think about and check. This is about being a really caring and conscientious therapist with good um, a frame and um, set of plans in place. So this question, what do we owe our clients? Um, a quote from Ellen Pinsky, who is a psychologist, says, "The way our work works is by our becoming important to people in whatever individual ways they make us important. We aim to matter. If our aim is to matter, and if we set out to court that condition, what is it for us to be lost?" So let's think about that together. We make our living on the relationship that we encourage, that we value. What then are our responsibilities? And she goes on to say, if we accept that we are mortal, then we are mortal. They are vulnerable to us at any point, regardless of our age. This is not something that only folks at the end of their career need to think about. If we are 30, 60, or 90, she says, they are vulnerable to us. And what is our responsibility? Maybe we don't have one, she says. But if we think we have one, and yet we tend to neglect it, why is that? And that is where most of us sit. Most of the folks that I talk to say, I know I've been meaning to, for 15 years, I've been meaning to write a will, but it's hard. It's really difficult. And we'll talk about that. But if you think it's important and you haven't yet done it, why? And what do you owe? What do you believe you owe your clients? So I've surveyed therapists, and of the concerns that they have, the size of these circles indicate, the strength of the concern. How my patients are notified about my death and to whom patients are referred are the biggest concerns that therapists have. Other things matter too, of course. Your conscientious, confidentiality matters. And then the business pieces of your practice, your lease, your belongings, your office, also insurance paperwork. We're going to talk about that. It matters for your clients, especially if You provide out-of-network service. If you disappear and they've paid you and can't get statements needed for out-of-network reimbursement, they may be in, financial jeopardy, unable to afford the lack of reimbursement. So I'll think about all the pieces that matter. But again, a point is that we are really driven by how deeply we care for our clients. So I'm going to be brief on the ethics, part of that. I think we are often familiar with our, principles that are aspirational, beneficence and non-maleficence. But I want to point out that it specifies clearly that we strive to be aware of the possible effect of our own physical and mental health on our ability to help those with whom we work. So it spells it out. Our health, our well-being matters, and we have a responsibility to consider the impact. Fidelity and responsibility, integrity. So we are working on relationships of trust, and we strive to keep our promises and avoid unwise commitments. So the enforceable standards specify a bit more clearly even that we have the obligation to make reasonable effort to plan for facilitating services for our clients in the event that our services are interrupted. We make plans in advance. This is important. This is a proactive responsibility to make a plan in advance for what would happen to protect confidentiality of records and ensure that they were available to your clients. And when therapy is interrupted, our paramount consideration is given to the welfare of the client and the patient. So those are the things we're thinking about today. The most important components of emergency practice planning has to do with continuity of care and record retention and the security, confidentiality. And so you likely know this, and anyone correct me if I haven't got it quite right, but from my understanding from the Texas code, that it does say pretty clearly that you should make necessary arrangements for the transfer of your client's records to another licensee. It doesn't specify whether that must be a psychologist licensed in Texas, but it says another licensee, someone capable of understanding what the regulations are, what the ethics are, how to be sure that the records are retained appropriately. And clients have the right to access for their records. So the reasons for this are continuity of care, and so that clients know where to go and how to access their records if needed. And specifies in the absence of any other responsibilities, 7-year record retention requirement, and for minors, 5 years over age of majority, so until they're 23. Okay, so those are written, those are laws. So how do we do this? We're talking about the official way of doing this. I hear often like, well, I sort of have a plan in my head, or I kind of wrote it down, but it's missing these pieces. We're talking about how to make it as likely as possible that what you want to happen will happen for your practice and for your client's sake. So the will is a document that actually directs your personal representative, usually your estate, your family, for what you want regarding your professional responsibilities. So it's really hi, honey, sweetheart, I know you don't know anything about my practice. If something were to happen to me and I'm not here, here's what I want you to do. I want you to notify this colleague who's agreed to take on these responsibilities and help me in these ways that are important to me. And here's what they need to know in order to be able to do that. That's what we're talking about. A professional will is not usually a legal document. It's a wish list. It's usually not a contract. No one is actually promising to do anything for you, but it is outlining specifically what you hope will be done. It doesn't supersede your last will and testament. It's not a power of attorney. It's not talking about your assets. It's about these professional responsibilities that we've talked about. And so it names a qualified practice executor. And one thing I want you to leave today with is the notion that it is important that this is a clinician. It, in your state, luckily, I think, says a licensee must be the one responsible for the records. A lot of states don't specify. And it's not clear to me that it specifies who would be that person who is the qualified practice executor and whether or not they need to be licensed. That's not clear to me that it needs to, by law, be someone reaching out to your clients. It by law needs to be someone licensed who's holding the records. But there's a gap in what is required. And I hear from a lot of people, well, my spouse would make those calls, or my adult child is also in the field and they could handle it, or my attorney would do it. I have heard stories where a neighbor of a therapist in New York was the one who came in and found the records and did these things. So my opinion is it should be a clinician and they need to agree to assume these responsibilities. And it specifies that they should act with reasonable effort. So what does that mean? And that's part of what we're talking about today. What happens sometimes without a plan, or what has happened in the past when we only had paper records and we only met with clients in our offices. Things were different. It had to be usually someone in the office next door who could come and find your book and see your records and be the ones to reach out, or to put a notice on your door saying, patients of Dr. Miller's practice should contact so and so, so that there was a notice when people showed up. But now we have many other ways of handling this, and I'm going to, talk about that. But reasonable in the past meant put a notice on the door and maybe hand a list of 3 or 5 colleagues' names on to all of the clients of that practice. And then you've given them referrals and you've notified them. Check. Is that reasonable? Is that what you want for your practice? So in my survey, 69% said they do not have a professional will. I think it's higher than that because those who responded, I think, probably are interested in this topic and maybe more likely to have one. And of those who do have one, don't think very many are likely comprehensive and fully actionable. So unfortunately, even when someone thinks they have a will in place, that person might not be available, or you might not have made arrangements for how they would get the passwords that they need, or the two-factor authenticator to your EHR. So with the best of intentions, someone might not be able to do what you want them to do. So these are the kinds of things we're going to talk about in great detail, how to make sure that the information is there so that your wish could be handled. But what gets in the way? Why don't we do this? Certainly denial of mortality, a lack of knowledge. I hear how overwhelming it is. We're not attorneys. We aren't, able necessarily to know how to do all of these things. The rules are different in every state. And it's hard to impose on someone. Who can you ask to do this? And part of today is helping you understand how much is involved, because I think one of the mistakes that we can make is not really gathering the complexity of the job and thinking like, sure, I would do it for you, you do it for me, no big deal. But it's a lot, and you ought to know what you're asking of someone and what they would be asking of you if you agree to do this. Um, I think we also have to consider our um, willingness to look at ourselves. And it's hard. We are asked to do a lot of things that are really hard. But we pride ourselves in many ways on being able to tolerate uh, taboo or really difficult emotion. You know, we tolerate disgust, we tolerate rage, we sort of feel proud that we can do that and sit with someone. But can we tolerate mortality? Can we sit with our own mortality? And that's part of what we're talking about today. How do you sit with that? And then think about the reality of the impact on our clients. So, one client that I spoke with, whose therapist had passed in a tragic manner, had told me that she knew the therapist was sick, but she didn't know with what or how serious. They were scheduling appointments around her medical appointments. But after an absence, she got a call from her own family member who had heard through the grapevine that the therapist had died. And this client said either she knew how sick she was and she didn't tell me, or she was in denial. Either one is disappointing. She was angry that this therapist hadn't been clear with her. And she said, the therapist continues to live inside of me with love, but I'm really frustrated about how she left me hanging. And she would have wanted honesty about the prognosis. She wishes there had been a plan in place to let her know when she died. And she wishes she could have learned about the funeral and attended. So you have choice. I want to be clear. We are not saying you must tell clients about your diagnosis, or you must tell them your personal business, or you must invite them to a funeral. You don't have to do any of those things if you don't want to, but you have to think about it. Think about what you would want now, what you think is in the best interest of your clients, the folks you work with, consistent with your relational style, and communicate that to someone else who can ensure that that happens. Otherwise, someone else will make those decisions for you, or they won't be made. Um, so Nancy McWilliams says something similar. It's a core part of our professional ego ideal to get our mind around the implication of all disturbing emotions. But us, like anyone else, we dissociate any self state that has to do with death. And the evidence is in how many of us procrastinate making a plan. So we get it. We get it. It's hard, but we hold ourselves to a higher standard on most things. And why should this be different? So when people do make a will, their motivations cluster. The biggest one is for patient welfare. You care about your clients. That's what I hear over and over. That's why you want to do that, why you're here today, probably. You also, of course, care about your ethical and legal obligations. You care about family and your estate, protecting them from the burden. It is a big mess when a practice is left in a sudden manner. And if you don't have a plan in place, it's going to be either your family or your colleagues who are going to try to do their best, but are left fielding calls and trying to um, figure out how to help. So we're going to talk about the cost of inadequate preparation. I'm going to talk some about what happens. And then I'm also going to talk about my first experience stepping in for a very close friend and colleague And that was my introduction into this whole world. And unfortunately had another incident with a friend that I covered for. And these experiences led me to write on the topic and then to train, and the feedback that I got on from folks, led to try to create a solution. I'm going to read you a short vignette, which I think highlights a number of the problems that we are trying to address by creating a will. So, someone had written there was an article in the New York Times last summer that talked about the patient's point of view in a traumatic situation of therapist loss. And so, not in that article or with that person, but someone wrote into the comments section about their own experience. And so, this person wrote, in the summer of 2023, my therapist died unexpectedly. His wife called to break the news and promised to send a covering therapist's contact info, which never arrived, but I didn't want to bother a grieving widow. After 7 years together, the loss hit hard. Googling what to do when your therapist dies turned up almost nothing, deepening my isolation. The obituary revealed sides of him I've never known. Finding a replacement felt impossible. No one could match someone who held 7 years of my history. My search came to an abrupt end when a receptionist, noting a 3-month wait list, suggested I should have planned better. I shot back, sorry, I hadn't planned for my therapist to die. I hung up and stepped away from therapy entirely. The threads that are touched on here: his wife called. She promised to send a referral, but it never happened. I didn't want to bother a grieving widow. One piece is important to think about how uncomfortable it is and what a violation of the boundaries that you probably have with your clients for your family member who your client knows is grieving and thinks to themselves, probably, oh, the family has the right to grieve. What do I have the right? Which I hear that a lot. Oh, I feel so terrible for the family, but tell them I'm fine and it's okay. And so to create space for the client to be able to grieve, to be able to acknowledge that their own attachment to you was profound and real, and their grief matters and is validated. There needs to be some space for them, and having a family member call them doesn't really allow for that for them. Another thread is the isolation. This isn't a normal kind of socially acceptable grief that we talk about or that we go to work and share and people understand. It's a very private grief often for people. Um, and how do you find someone else? It's really hard. A lot of people fall through the cracks here because different populations, especially, it's hard to have the resources and the patience to pursue finding the right person with openings and who takes your insurance and all of these things. So a lot of people drop out at that point, meeting some walls. So those are the kinds of situations that we're trying to prevent. A couple other folks that I interviewed said, different things of their stories. He didn't show for an appointment and didn't respond to calls. I thought he was dropping me. I found his obituary via Google. One day I simply walked into her office for our usual appointment and no one was there. A few weeks later, I saw her obituary seeking a therapist. Felt unthinkable. I want to correct myself. This is not my interview. These were additional comments from the New York Times. I will mention folks I've interviewed in a minute. So, who carries the cost? As I've talked about, there is emotional harm to your client. There's feelings of abandonment, unprocessed grief that happens. I interviewed 15 therapists who lost their own therapists in a sudden manner. 2 of them found out by text message. 2 received a call from the therapist's spouse. Three were told by a colleague of the therapist in a sensitive manner. That's what we're going for. That's helpful. One was told, I have no one to recommend you to. One was given referrals. One got a phone call from an admin who seemed overwhelmed and never called back. Five felt rage. This is an important part and has to do with the plan you put in place and the goals. I have learned that to mitigate the rage that people have when they feel abandoned, when they feel like this person didn't have any plan, maybe they never even cared about me after all, when they don't hear what happened, they don't learn the reason for the abandonment, they're angry. And so that has a destructive impact on how they metabolize the therapy that they had with you. And so one of my goals became to preserve that positive transference, their internalization of you as the good therapist and whatever good work they did with you so that they can walk away thinking, my therapist was great. This is so tragic and terrible, and I'm really sad and I'm at a loss. But I'm so fortunate and I benefited from that therapy rather than destroying it in their mind. So that 5 of 15 felt rage. That's pretty significant. Um, and only one of the 15 knew what happened to his medical records. And of the 15 who went through this experience, only 6 have made their own professional will to protect their own clients from exactly what they went through. So that tells you how profound our denial is, right? This is hard. It's important to appreciate that there's also public harm that any one of these situations can cause. There's situations of a violation of confidentiality. I have a story from a state board who got complaints after a widow put paper records in the recycling bin on the curb. A storm came, blew the records all over the neighborhood, and people were picking up psychotherapy notes and called with a complaint. So even with the best of intentions, we cannot count on the people around us to know what to do, to have our same understanding around our responsibilities. And again, if we don't plan for it, we don't know what will happen. There's also the financial harm of unresolved billing for your clients, disrupted continuity of care. And all of this, as these stories, spread, there's an erosion of trust in the public for the profession. To say another bit about the risk to your family, without a plan in place, they are the ones who are fielding those phone calls from clients who are leaving desperate messages and they don't know what to do, despite their maybe understanding of how important your practice is to you and their wish to do right by you and by your clients. They don't know what to do. So, here's an example. I was put in the position of deciding how to handle her death in relation to her clients. I was uncomfortable. It violated confidentiality. I didn't have the knowledge base to refer them to other therapists. This person goes on to say how uncomfortable it was for the patients too, but he felt like he wanted them to know that that was better than the alternative, but still not good, complicated. So what needs to happen in a crisis? And I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about this before I get to the making of the professional will, which I know is really what you're here to hear about. But I think it's important to understand what it is that you're asking of someone before you can write your own will. So the situation that I first encountered was when my very close friend and supervision partner of 17 years um, called me in my 10-minute window between clients and said, I'm in the hospital. They found a tumor. Can you take my practice? And that was it. She died 6 weeks later. and never set foot in her office again. So, what happened there led to my understanding of stages of the work. I'm going to outline them for you and give you some examples. Um, and I also want to say some of what I learned and some of what the guidelines are do come from an aspirational place because I did have her very briefly, but I had her to tell me what she wanted for her clients. She was incredibly devoted, and I'll say more. But and so she had very um, clear ideas about what she wanted me to do, that what she thought was in their best interest to handle this situation. And so that led me later to kind of think about, we often don't have the opportunity to hear from the therapist what they would want exactly, when sudden circumstances occur. But if we had the opportunity to tell someone what we would want, what would that be? And how do we think about that ahead of time and leave as much information as we could, just in case? So, phase one is the immediate triage of patients. What happens to your current clients? How are they notified? How are they told their appointments aren't happening that are coming up tomorrow, the day after, and next week? How are they provided with coverage? The next phase is about the business of the practice. Who's going to issue bills so that your estate can collect what's owed, if that is important to your estate? Who's going to provide that documentation for the clients? How does the rest of the business get handled? And then the third phase is the dismantling of the practice, which includes the long-term record retention and the full closure of the practice. So we'll get into these details. So phase one is about patient notification and care. The immediate is, okay, where are the records? You get this call, something's happened. Where are the records and are they secure? Yes. Once they're secure, then you don't have to deal with them right away. You have more important things, but you want to make sure they're secure. What about voicemail, email, websites, the ways that clients are going to continue to reach out and to leave messages about appointments and request services and so forth. So we want to, as quickly as we can, change that either to indicate this person's on leave of absence, or this practice has been closed, or this therapist is not available, call so-and-so for information. Call Dr. Miller with questions. Where's the patient schedule list? If the person you're covering for has 30 patients, you can't make all those calls today, right now. So who's going to be seen tomorrow? What's the priority for who is contacted? And ahead of these calls, you want to have in your pocket at least some crisis intervention referrals. What you don't know what you're going to face on the other end of the phone. So being able to provide referrals, you as the covering or as the practice executor are not taking on all these clients to be your own clients. You do not have to be available for all of them as a therapist. You don't have to be available for any of them if you don't want to. You certainly can choose to take on one or two, but you are helping facilitate that continuity of care. So thinking about making these calls, what's your stance? These are not, robocalls. They are not 10-minute conversations that you make between your own patients. You are making really hard calls to people. These are shocking calls for people to get. And they're incredibly powerful to, on the end of the one making the call. They're really touching, but also, really hard. So my recommendation is that you're calling as a really present human being. You're relating in a caring way. Your goal, as I said earlier, my goal is to communicate that the therapist deeply cares for the client, and this is not how they would want this to be, and that whatever coverage they've arranged or whatever I'm offering comes from the client, from the therapist's good intentions or desire to help the client process whatever terrible situation is unfolding. So, of course, you're going to watch for abandonment or grief or anger or helplessness. People want to help. And it's very distressing to them when they say, can I drop off a casserole? Can I make a donation? Can I, write a letter? Does her family need anything? And you're kind of saying, that's so kind of you. Really, it's deeply appreciated, but no. That's hard. People feel helpless and powerless and frustrated. And so that's another, thing to be aware of. And you want to document those calls, how they reacted, how you handled it, if you gave them a referral, if you say you're going to look into referrals for them, which is perfectly fine. You don't have to give them a referral in that call, but you can ask what kind of therapist would be helpful to you. Do they need to take a certain insurance? Does a location matter? Whatever that it is, you can say, I will work on that and I will get back to you. But you have to do it. Don't leave them hanging. So my friend, I will call her Dr. B. Dr. B was incredibly thoughtful about this, really selfless beyond maybe what I think I would have been in her shoes or what other people might be. She was really thinking about each person. So she told me, call that college student only on the weekend when she's home with her family so she has support to process the news. Call that guy with paranoid features. Actually, don't call him. Call his father and have his father tell him so that it doesn't come from a disembodied voice of a stranger. This other person who struggles with lower functioning behaviors, ask to have a joint call with her partner because she's going to do better if the partner's present when this is communicated. Someone with a really significant life event that Dr. B was very concerned for the patient about their well-being. She didn't want me to tell that person right away. So we created a plan where I dribbled information, true information, but slow dribble of it to this one patient. Dr. B is ill. She's not available. I will call you back in a week or two when I know more. Dr. B is in the hospital. They are trying to figure out what is going on. I will get back to you when I know more. And dragged this out until the point that Dr. B thought this patient was now stable enough, given their own circumstance, to be told what happened. And I did that. So obviously, without some input from the therapist, you can't know this level of detail, and that's fine. You do your best. This is all about any of us just doing our best. But for you thinking about what you would want, think about, are there particular clients and what would you want for them? And is that worth communicating in one way or another? Logging that so that that information would be available if someone needed to step in. So I did put together kind of a script of a call that developed over time, making so many of these calls. And I would say, I'm the psychologist covering for Dr. B's practice. Are you in a quiet place where you can speak privately? Do you have supports available to you? I have upsetting news to share. Dr. B wishes she could tell you herself, but she's not able. She has been diagnosed with. And this is because Dr. B wanted me to tell every patient that she had terminal pancreatic cancer. She did not want them guessing. She did not want them having false hope that she was going to recover. She wanted me to tell them, which was hard to do for me. But that was part of it. And so, again, on your own, think about what you would want communicated, how much information, because clients have lots of questions. And someone else will decide that if you don't specify. So I'd say she's very ill and no longer able to be available to her patients. And then sit quietly and let people react. And this is where they have a lot to say sometimes or nothing to say. Occasionally people say, I can't talk to you right now. I need to hang up. It's okay. Would it be okay if I call you back in a couple days? Um, other others, launch into a very touching sort of explanation of what Dr. B had meant to them and their concerns and what was going to happen next. And so being available to have time and energy for these calls. If you get a voicemail, leave a message just rescheduling. Dr. B will be unable to keep your appointment scheduled for next week. Please, it's very important that you return my call. Um, but don't leave more information than that. Have those immediate crisis coverage resources if possible. Follow up if you say you will. So here's some examples of things clients had to say to me in return. I'm so grateful. Please tell her she's been a wonderfully positive force in my life. I'm shocked. She was amazingly stabilizing for me. I could always count on coming in and getting grounded. This next person was someone who struggled with chronic pain, and she was very concerned about Dr. B's potential pain. And she said she had taught me more, been there for me more than anyone ever has. She taught me emotions. Literally, she taught me the words, and she wanted me to uh, offer Dr. B that she would obtain marijuana for Dr. B if she was in pain. This was pre legalization. So I had to decline that offer, but it's sort of indicative of how patients care deeply too for you and they want to help and be there in the ways that, has been part of your relationship with them. But you also have to think hard about who is your patient population. And if you work with a lot of trauma survivors or character disorders, you might get something like this. I was very hurt and I've decided I will not seek another therapist. What a waste of a decade spilling my guts only to be screwed over by the one person I trusted. So, diagnostic, but again, this might be who you're dealing with and what are they going to need? This person, told me this after the fact of my call, and then 6 months later wrote, an apology to me describing how distressed and she was at the time of learning this. But that might be people's reactions. So what then? So once the current patients were dealt with, notified, helped with referrals, then phase two, the business closure. I'm not going to say too much more than I've said already about that. But, if you aren't giving the executor the information that they need to do that, who will be doing that? Will your family be doing that? Will they need to send bills? Will they need to do something that violates confidentiality and makes them or your clients uncomfortable? Without a plan, that can be, quite an uncomfortable mess on both sides. And then phase three is everything current has been handled. Now what's the big picture? Records need to be kept for the duration required, and that is confusing. APA says 7, HIPAA says 6, Medicare Advantage says 10. If you practice under SIPAC, go with the most conservative state where you see people. So this can be difficult to figure out. I recommend keeping phone and websites active for at least a year, maybe even the entire retention period. This has to do with the right of former clients to know how to find their records. So if the messaging is changed, this practice has been closed, anyone reaching out for information or medical records should contact Dr. Miller and leave the way to do that. This is sometimes not necessary if your state law or if you wish to have your executors send a notification letter to all your clients going back the whole 7 years whose records are requiring retention, saying, I'm informing you that the record custodian has changed, and if you need your records, you can obtain them here. But as many of you may be thinking, this is not necessarily clinically sound. Do you want someone who you saw 6 years ago, whose record still requires retention, to hear from you or get a note that you've recently died and someone else has their records? You may not want that, but the ethics and the legal requirements for how far back you need to notify are there. The law varies in every state. And even when there isn't a clear law, you got to think about the ethical requirement for them to be able to know how to find their records. Um, you want to maintain a destruction log for expired records. I'm going to give a quick example. Think about all the things that might occur. So when I went to Dr. B's office to get the records, paper records at the time, pre-COVID, I looked around her office and thought, is anything else here confidential that I would be responsible for rather than the family who's going to come in and pack up her stuff later? Or rather than putting it in the trash, what do I do? And I saw all these objects that were clearly to me handmade gifts from patients that had either writing on the back or somehow seemed symbolic of the therapy work. And I thought, I didn't know what to do with it. So in the end, I decided to take it with the records and to just keep it with the records that I was storing. And about 6 months later, I got a call from a former patient of Dr. B's who had not been in touch with her in the past year, but had seen her for many years prior, saying that she had just heard Dr. B had died and she wanted to know what happened to all those objects that she had given Dr. B over the years. And she had given them because she wanted Dr. B to hold on to her, she said. And now she would like them back because she would want to hold on to Dr. B through those objects. And I was able to tell her I have them and I could return them to her, which I did. So this was a very touching interaction. And there are lots of things like this that happen where you are serving a function as maybe a transitional object for these clients who you are the one sharing this news. I sometimes call them terminations by proxy. If we had more time, I can kind of go into that in more depth. But this is a meaningful act of calling people and talking with them about their therapist. And so briefly, an example just to show you, you don't need to know this, but the states vary in record retention and who needs to be notified and how. Some states require a notification in the paper over several months. Some say the custodian has to be named. Some um, don't specify. Oregon is one of the only, I think the only, who says it must be another Oregon licensed psychologist who is responsible for this. Most states don't have that requirement, but just to be aware that there's a lot to look into. So making your own will. Now that you have in mind what someone would need to do for you, think about what you want. So the 3 steps are, what do you want? What do you need to communicate so that they can do what you want? And who? Who's going to do it? So defining your directive first. How do you want them to be notified? My opinion is that current clients should be notified by phone in a conversation, but some people prefer that they are emailed and not called. You can decide what you want. Um, what are your personal boundaries? How much information should be shared? Do you want them to be able to attend a memorial service if there is one? Because clients will ask. Do you want to write a goodbye letter that is sent to your clients along the lines usually of, if you are receiving this, this means something unexpected has happened to me and I am no longer able to be there, but I want to share with you how much doing this work has meant to me. Something like that. People have different ideas about that. Some want that and write beautiful letters. Others don't like that idea at all, and that's fine. There's no right answer. But think about what you want. Who is going to be keeping those records? Where? How? Are there costs associated? How are you going to pay for that? What about compensation for the executor? You can gather now that this is a lot of time required to make these calls, to find the referrals, to call them back with the referrals, to write the letters if around change of custody. When people are thinking that this is a couple hours worth of work, they often write in the will, my estate will reimburse you your hourly rate for time spent serving as my practice executor. But what it really takes is about 2 hours per active client in the practice. So if you see 20 clients a week, it's going to take someone 40 hours to handle this. And that's a lot of unexpected cost by that your estate will owe, 10 or $20,000. So, think carefully. Do you want to provide a flat fee compensation? Do you want to make a donation? Whatever that agreement is, that needs to be considered and in writing. What about the records? What about the billing? Do you want them to do that? How should she do that? Do you have people you would want them to refer to? Colleagues that you like? What if you have a testing practice or a group practice? What if you have supervisees? What's your plan for each of these scenarios? So how do you empower someone to do what you want? Well, you want the will to be a signed contract. You want an agreement with one or with more than one that they are going to do this for you. How will they access your information? Where are the keys to your office, to the filing cabinet if you have paper records? And think about it. I hear from a lot of people, I have 40 years worth of paper records in my garage or in my basement. If you do, get rid of them, please. Spare your family from having to figure that out and deal with them. Get rid of all that doesn't need to be held anymore. And think about where someone is going to put that for the next 7 years, potentially 20 plus years if you see young kids and those records need to be held until they're 23 or 25. Um, so what are you asking of someone? If you have electronic health record, how will they access it? What about your voicemail, your email, your website? What about two-factor authentication? Who would find your phone to get the code to give to them? So even if they have the updated password, they might not be able to get in. How do you make arrangements for all of that? Here's where also you want to provide a copy of your professional will to your personal executor, to your attorney. You might want to ask your professional liability insurance if they want a copy. Some do, some don't. Um, you want to amend your consent to treatment form so that you put in there something like, I have made arrangements with a licensed psychologist to contact you and to take custody of the medical records in the unlikely event that I was incapacitated or unexpectedly unable to practice. Um, Update your will periodically. Things change. Don't forget when you change your EHR to let them know and change the passwords and so forth. So who? Mostly what I've been discussing is this traditional one-to-one arrangement that came about at the time that we had paper records and offices and paper calendars, and it could only be done that way with someone who could come in and find your information and figure it out. And that's often with an informal agreement or a template based with a colleague. So that's one of those casual arrangements that Dr. B and I had. And we did have it written down. We had wills, but it was based on the idea of, hey, I'll do it for you if you do it for me. Sure. Never thinking really that that would be required or what those details would be. Another option is a cooperative group agreement. So if you have a peer network, they can share responsibility. You can designate someone as a bridge therapist. I'm going to talk more about each of these in a minute. Um, but that if you have a peer supervision group or that can be a possibility. And then there is the option of professional executor service, and that's where you have a consultation to have the details of your practice understood, put into a structured will that then names clinicians, professional folks to be on retainer for you. And I'll talk about that. So this one-to-one, you get how it works now. The pros are there's no upfront cost, and it's often comforting to think that your close friend and colleague is going to help you with this. You trust them, you know their style. That certainly was a comfort for Dr. B. And I will say that it was an honor to do this for her, to be able to do something helpful at such a powerless and terrible time. But in the cons, it was also incredibly stressful, tremendously burdensome. I did feel frustrated, angry, deprived of time to grieve her myself and to, experience that. It's unspecified. Often those templates are maybe not detailed enough. It's important to know lawyers are costly. And if you pay a lawyer to get your will, it's a very, very good legal document, but it is still only a piece of paper. Who is going to do the things for you? Your attorney? Probably not. You still need to have an agreement with someone. Again, not always a legal contract, can be quite costly. Your colleague may not be available, and it may require your family to have to help. So with a group of colleagues, and I want to call your attention at the bottom, Ann Steiner is someone who has written and promoted this in her work, trainings of the therapist professional will emergency response team. So she suggests with a peer network, identify each person's needs. Everyone's practice is different. We don't really think about how different, how someone does their billing, how they handle this, how they handle that. It's for every one of us on this call, there's going to be some variation that unless you specify it, no one else is going to know or figure out how to do that part for you. Assign responsibilities, create an agreement. How are they going to communicate with one another? So the pros for sure are shared responsibility. This burden doesn't fall on any one person, and that there's likely no cost. Again, there are some cons. There's the higher risk for breach of confidentiality. You don't know whether your colleagues know any of your clients socially, whether there might be some kind of exposure that happens. The more people that know, the greater the likelihood of some kind of overlap or breach. There's a risk of inadequate care because each person thinks somebody else is handling something. A lot of people tell me they don't have a professional network anymore, or their colleagues have retired and they don't have anyone to ask anymore, or they, feel pretty isolated in a telehealth only practice and don't know who to ask. And the family may still need to step in to help with access if the plan is not sufficient. So, given my experiences, the talk would end here, but I thought long and hard over a number of years about how silly it seems to me that each one of us is in our own office trying to figure out how to do this ourselves, like a DIY project, when it is an ethical obligation and often a legal obligation. We need more help. And so professionalizing this and doing it in a way that can help people get it done and have the peace of mind rather than being overwhelmed and procrastinate for 15 years. So that was the intent to make it easier for people to have a good plan in place without putting that burden on your close colleagues at the time of an incident. So created TheraClosure. There are a couple others that have come up behind us just in the past year or so. I can mention there's one called DOVA, one called Symmetry of Self. If you are looking into others, I encourage you to really understand the level of comprehensive services that is available and the way they structure what they would be willing to do for you, and the costs they vary significantly. So the way we work, it's advanced planning. We want to meet with you. We want to understand your practice, who you work with, how you work with them, how you relate to them, what you would want for them. We come up with a very detailed emergency access plan to all the information that we need. We offer a password manager that handles, making sure that we would have updated access and two-factor authentication access. There are expert clinicians then who are named on that. You don't need to find a colleague. It's we are the practice executor named in the will, and we would step in to do all these things on your behalf if necessary. It doesn't need to be a close colleague and may not even be in the patient's best interest necessarily for it to be a grieving colleague, but are people who know how to do this and have the professional distance from you to be able to focus on your client's needs. And then there's a fixed annual cost that could be treated as a practice expense. And that's put in place. And then we're on retainer in case something happens. So if something were to happen, then there would be that initial triage and compassionate care for the current clients, notification, referrals, record retention for the duration required, fulfilling of the notification requirements, completion of the outstanding billing, closing down administrative aspects of the practice if you want. It's all sort of customizable for your wishes. And we think there are a lot of pros to that. You control costs. Your estate will never be handed an unexpected, large bill, any bill. There's a fail-safe plan in place, comprehensive. You have experienced clinicians ready to serve, sufficient, it's cost-effective, reliable, hopefully spares your family and gives you peace of mind. And the cons are there's an upfront yearly cost. And if you use paper records, we don't come to your house or your office and take your paper records. We work together to come up with a plan for how those records would be digitized and then transferred. And that's much easier than it often sounds or where folks worry it is. And I can say more about that if you would like. So that is how we work. I will also just say real briefly, we do retirement too, because it's important to know that most of these obligations exist in retirement as well around planning for record retention. If you're keeping those records yourself, what happens if something happens to you during that retention period? Who then will take them? Um, so the whole point of all of this is to have a compassionate and ethical closure, one where clients will feel cared for and respected. They feel supported at a terrible time. The treatment stays with them, metabolized. They feel like they did good work. They gained, they grew in their work with you, even though it ends in a tragic way. And so, what I often say, I don't think I said this yet today, is that we can't prevent loss. They would be grieving, they would be sad, but we can prevent traumatic loss. And that's what we are trying to do here. We want that positive transference to remain intact. People do better. They're more likely to return to therapy, to have a positive relationship with another therapist if this was handled in a way that makes them feel that they were taken care of well. And you want to protect your family and colleagues from having to figure all this out and handle it. And people, both patients and family, when we step in, are incredibly grateful for the forethought that went into kind of handling this. Um, so very briefly, just a last vignette. One of the therapists that I spoke with who lost his therapist in a tragic way, um, he said he learned on a professional listserv that his therapist, long-term therapist, had died. He said he went to the memorial and he listened to others speaking about the man, not only the therapist. And he felt really good hearing this because he felt that he knew this man authentically. The man who was being described was the therapist that he knew. And this was compelling to him. He said, "This was more difficult than the loss of my parents. Who knows you better than someone you've been talking to intimately for 8 years? I had expectations he would be there for me. I was devastated and overwhelmed." He was crying. This situation had occurred for him many, many years earlier, but he was tearful as he was describing this story to me. And he said he had wished that he would have been able to see him one last time. He was one of the 6 who made his own will for his clients because he said the important thing is their suffering is minimized and not added to by negligence, so to speak. So I want to end on the thought that all of this really is a love letter to the therapeutic bond. It is about how much we matter and how much we care about our clients, and all of the forethought and the care that goes into the what if scenario is, an extension of the care that we deliver every day. So you have these slides, or we will put up a link. I know that I had sent them earlier, and hopefully you have access to them. So these links work. There is a reference list that you can go to that has a lot of reading material on there and other references as well if you'd like to listen to podcasts or read more articles, some that I've written, many that other people have written. There is an ultimate professional will checklist that you can download. There are some templates available. I don't provide, that as part of the talk, but the San Diego Psych Association wrote the initial template, and it's still the one that APA uses. I think it needs to be updated, but as a reference point to see, you can look there. And then I did pull together composites of many professional wills that are available online to give you an example of a more comprehensive version. It is not the will that we use, but it's not too far off. And then there's also, we collaborated with the trust insurance and just released a set of guidelines around emergency practice planning resources, and you can download that there as well. So I am going to pause there and can look at the chat and see questions. But I am also happy if someone wants to unmute and ask. I am glad for us to have a conversation, thoughts, worries, questions, experiences that you've had. Please jump in.
I put some questions in the chat. Thanks, it was extremely informative. My practice is primarily psych testing, but with primarily non-English speaking clients. In securing a service, do they typically have clinicians who will be able to do that for this type of clientele?
Yes, we do. We do have clinicians that are able to speak Spanish. And we also, because we don't know down the road how long, if or when need be, we do promise to contract with folks who at that time, if we didn't currently have someone who was able to hire
To do
clinicians
that.
who would be able to do that.
The other question is if you have a colleague that you secure as the executor, um, would they at any point be liable for not following through on the contract?
I don't know the answer to that. I have not heard of any case where that has been true. I have received calls recently, even from the wife of a therapist who passed away, who was calling me to say he had named her spouse had named two colleagues who had agreed to take the records and to call the clients. And now they've said it's too much work. They don't want to do it. They can't take all the records. What do I do now? That experience I hear a lot. I have not heard about an actual lawsuit against anyone who failed to follow through, more the panic of the family of what do we do now?
Okay. And the last question I had is that if you do secure a service and looking at the cost, is the cost when you think about maintaining records, does it go the 7 years or is it longer? How does that work?
So I'm not going to get into actual pricing, but the way
No.
we work is a yearly cost to be on retainer for you from year to year. And if we have to step in, we do everything we had agreed to at no cost. So
Okay.
full record retention for 23 years if necessary, the 7 years, the whatever it is, the calling in the clients, the finding the referrals, there's no cost. So we've put it together similar to car insurance or malpractice, where you're paying for the risk to have the reassurance that you would be covered in case. Others handle the pricing, the costs differently, but we want you to know that you are handling that year to year, and then there would never be something unexpected that lands on your family.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anybody else want to pop in? Question or an experience that you had either as a practice executor or a circumstance where you needed a practice executor, and how you handled or anything that came up?
I will say there was one question in the very beginning when you were talking about how to choose the regulations in Texas, how to choose who it could be. And Leah asked uh, if she could choose a fellow active licensed LPC.
Um, yes, I believe so. I am not sure whether there are specific counselor discipline regulations, so I did not look into that for this talk. But you could contact your association or review those um, in the absence of anything that says something specific otherwise, then I would say absolutely yes. Could be someone who has your same license for sure.
Mhm. I just have a comment or a question. Um, I was in a situation where I was in an accident and incapacitated for a bit, but I wasn't prepared for that. And so it was handled by random people, and my clients hurt in various ways. And there was a lot of repair to do. So is this something you could provide not just for a death, but for a temporary disability, say?
Yes. So ours is designed, and I do recommend, however you arrange your professional will, that it should be for the case of incapacitation or death. And incapacitation we define as anything physical or mental that would prohibit you from the capacity to serve in from the ability to serve in your professional capacity. So that might, mean the terrible, tragedy of grieving a child, for example, and you're out of your head and can't possibly contact your patients. That counts. It would, count, of course, if you're in a coma and you recover. I have stepped in for other people for shorter periods of time to notify the clients, to kind of give them temporary coverage, to promise to get back to them when I know more, to give them updates on the therapist's condition and expected return to practice, and without then going to the second half of the work of closing down the practice, but just kind of letting that be for the time being. So, yeah.
It's a great business model and something that's nice to know that it's out there.
Thank you.
I never would have thought of doing that, but it's a great service. Good job.
Thank you. It hits you enough times with good friends that you might become impassioned about this too.
Yeah. Yeah, good job.
Any other thoughts or experiences? Be happy to hear of anyone's stepping in for a colleague and how you handled that. No, everybody's ready for lunch. Well, thank you so much for your attention and interest, and I am happy to be available. Reach out to me personally. We do offer free consultations if you would like to, think about whether this would be a fit for your practice. Um, and however you decide to do it, please do it. Make a plan. It's better than no plan, however you decide to move forward.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Dr. Miller. As I said, the handouts for the slide have been uploaded to CE21 where you're registered, but if you cannot find them, feel free to reach out to me. I put my email in the chat. So yeah, thank you again, and thank you all for attending.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.